Now what happened to Netaji? How did he get out? Again, I ask you to recall what Habib told the Shahnawaz Khan committee. Netaji was trying to go towards the rear of the plane, but Habib told him, इधर से नहीं, आगे से निकलिए, पीछे से रास्ता नहीं है. Once he got out of the plane, he saw Netaji standing about 10 yards apart ahead of him, looking towards the west, standing with his clothes on fire. And then, with great difficulty, he opened the belt of the bush coat that Netaji was wearing, the khaki drill that Netaji was wearing. Pretty graphic description, right? Doesn't look like a lapse of memory, doesn't sound like memory is failing. He remembered exactly what happened and described it in great detail. Now there is a slight problem. When the Americans had interrogated him in Ramamurthy's house in September 1945, Habib had told them a completely different story. He told them that he had no idea how Netaji got out of the plane. And when he emerged from the plane, he saw Netaji lying down with his clothes on fire. And then he went and removed his clothes. So, moving from I don't remember how Netaji escaped from the plane to I told him Netaji aage se nikliye, is this a lapse in memory? Is this a sign of failing memory? A minor discrepancy? This is an addition to the story. This is not forgetting. This is adding detail. So, which one is to be believed? In front of the Shahnawaz Khan committee, Nonogaki also gave the same story which Habib said. He told the committee that when he saw Netaji for the first time after the crash, he found him standing with his clothes on fire and Habib trying to take out his clothes. Absolutely fine, in sync. But in 1946, when he had spoken to Colonel Figs, he had given a different story. At that time, he told Figs that Netaji had put on a tight-fitting jacket because of the cold. आपको कैसे पता चला ननोगाकी भैया? Because Habib said that he had given the pullover to Netaji, which Netaji refused to wear. So when did Netaji put it on and how did it escape Habib's notice? कुछ ही मिनटों की तो बात थी. Not only this, to Figs, Nonogaki said that he joined Habib in beating out the flames from Netaji's clothes. And when it was not possible to take out his clothes, Netaji was taken to an emergency room in the Aerodrome where his clothes had to be cut out. Okay. So which one is true? What he said to Shahnawaz Khan committee, that he saw Netaji standing with his body on flame, Habib trying to take out his clothes, or what he told Figs, that he joined Habib in beating out the flames and then Netaji had to be taken to an emergency room to cut his clothes out. I mean, again, is this minor discrepancy? You are assigning a role to yourself and then forgetting about it? Is this some daily chore that you would do and forget, won't remember? This is a situation, a life-threatening situation from which you have emerged, and along with you there are other people and you are assigning an active role to yourself and then forgetting about it? Believable? Now Takahashi, ये भाई सब तो और भी बढ़िया है. He claimed that it was he who took out Netaji's clothes and Habib had no role to play there. Habib was passively standing by. He saw Netaji standing trying to put out the fire. So he went ahead, held Netaji's legs, asked him to roll on the ground, and that's how the fire was put out. And according to Takahashi, not much burn was there. Only patches of his upper clothing were burnt, and his trousers were slightly burnt. So the clothes remained on his body. They were not taken out. One of the biggest proponents of Netaji's death in the plane crash, his biographer Leonard Gordon, who also parrots out the same line that about minor discrepancies. He spoke to Taro Kono, and Taro Kono told him, I will read out. Major Kono, who was lying on the ground a short distance from the plane and saw bows on fire, described him as a living Fudomyo, a Japanese Buddhist temple guardian who is usually represented with fierce visage, hair aflame, face contorted, and weapons in hand. So dramatic, no? So emotional. That was Taro Kono's evidence, which is put forward with so much pomp by Leonard Gordon. Now let's see what Taro Kono said to the Shanwas committee. Contrary to what others said about Netaji's clothes being on, or what Nonogaki said that he had to be taken to the emergency room to cut out his clothes, Taro Kono said that he saw, when he came to his senses, Netaji standing erect, fully naked. And contrary to the dramatic representation of Leonard Gordon, which he cites as evidence, he didn't see any fire on Netaji's body. Let me repeat. Taro Kono did not see any fire on Netaji's body, but he remembered seeing some light on his body. He saw some blood in his eyes. His face did not show any signs of pain. So this is Taro Kono to Shanwas Khan committee, and this is Taro Kono, the same Taro Kono to Leonard Gordon. Now this Leonard Gordon values his interviews, what he heard from the survivors, so much that he has based his entire conclusion on them. And not only Leonard Gordon, following him, Anita Pfaff, who apparently accompanied him to interview one of the survivors. Just one interview with one survivor, and she became convinced for her life that that has to be the truth. So here is our historian, here is our evidence. I leave it to you what to make of it. But the fun doesn't end here. We still have Nakamura, or Yamamoto, who was in charge of the aerodrome. He claimed that he and two or three of his men rushed towards Netaji and took out his clothes. So Nonogaki says, me. Yamamoto says, no, it's me. Takahashi says, well, it's me. And Habib, of course, says, nobody but me. Now, lapse of memory, minor discrepancy. Is this something that your memory gets confused about? Because you are not talking about observation here. You are not all these people were not passive observers. They assigned themselves active roles. And that's not something that you forget. I can bet that if you see a person on fire in front of you, and if you go to put out that fire, if you help, you will never forget that experience. Now, following all this, multiple roles by multiple people in helping Netaji, as Habib said, that they lay down on the ground for about 15-20 minutes, and then the trucks and the cars, ambulances came from with Japanese nurses, and they were taken to the hospital in 15-20 minutes. The surgeon in charge of the hospital where they were all taken, the Nanmon hospital, the military hospital, Dr. T. Yoshimi, he said that Netaji was brought in absolutely naked. He had not a piece of cloth on his body. But we remember that there were some in the airport who said that it was not necessary to take off Netaji's clothes. Now, there are certain discrepancies here also about who was taken to the hospital first. Kekichiarai said that he was the first to arrive in the hospital. Nonogaki said he and Major Kono were the first ones to arrive in the hospital. Dr. Yoshimi said that Habib and Netaji were the first ones to arrive. But that's too inconsequential to even deal with. So let's leave it at that. Similarly, there is also a lot of discrepancy between the accounts, the various accounts about who was taken to which room, which ward, who was kept where, who stayed together and who were separated. But again, that is a minor point, inconsequential. These are discrepancies. But let's give it a benefit of doubt and just not ignore for the time being. Let's focus on the major points. What was Netaji's condition in the hospital? Remember when Habib gave the graphic description of the plane crash and how Netaji was affected, how he was injured and all? He mentioned that there was a deep 4-inch cut on his head which was bleeding profusely. Now, to the CSDIC, Habib had said that there were 2 or 3 fractures on the head. So these 2 or 3 fractures on the head transformed themselves into a 4-inch deep cut, bleeding profusely in 10 years of time. Now, the problem is that the attending doctor, Dr. Yoshimi, deposed before the Shahnawaz Khan committee and said that when Netaji was brought in, there was absolutely no cut or fracture apart from the burns. Dr. T. Suruta, who was assisting Dr. Yoshimi, also testified that there was no injury mark, no cut mark on Netaji's body. Should we call this minor discrepancy? One thing that stands out clearly, everyone has agreed on that one single point, is that soon after arrival into the hospital, Netaji was completely bandaged up. Only his eyes and mouth and nose were visible, and nothing else. As Netaji arrived with 2nd and 3rd degree burns, Dr. Yoshimi asked Dr. Suruta to put white ointment, apply white ointment on his body. By Dr. Yoshimi's version, I gave him for his heart, one after the other, 4 injections of Vitacamphor and 2 injections of digitamin. I also gave him 3 injections of Ringer solution, 500 cc each one after the other. Dr. Suruta applied white ointment all over his burns and bandaged. While this was being done, I gave Mr. Bose some injections. Dr. Suruta testified that more injections were given to him once he was brought back into the ward from the operation theatre. He said that ointment was applied to his entire body and he was completely bandaged up. Some portion of his chest was left unbandaged, and then he was covered with a white sheet. There were a few nurses around who were taking care of Netaji and we were assisting the doctors. Now, I have to mention another investigating genius whose evidence has been cited by the plane crash theorists as the ultimate proof of Netaji's death. There was a journalist by the name of Harind Shah who went to Taihuku in 1946 and got into investigative journalism. And 10 years later, in 1956, he published a book about what he heard, saw, and what evidence he gathered. He claimed that he had discovered a nurse by the name of Chanpisa, who was apparently attending to Netaji. And she told Shah that Netaji died in that ward, in that hospital, and there is no doubt about it. And this became the ultimate truth for Harin Shah, and Harin Shah was close to Sardar Patel. Through Patel, it became the officially acknowledged version, evidence, supporting evidence of Netaji's death. Those other geniuses who today rattle out number of investigations that established Netaji's death also include Harin Shah's investigation into that list. Now let's just take a look at what Chanpisa, Sister Chanpisa, whom Harin Shah discovered in Formosa, what she told at that time in 1946. Chanpisa told Harin Shah that she applied olive oil on all of Netaji's body. Olive oil. Whereas both Yoshimi and Suruta, the two main doctors, are saying that Suruta applied white ointment. Chanpisa said she was applying olive oil. Chanpisa also told Harin Shah, and Harin Shah took it as the final authority, that Netaji was not given a single injection because he was so badly burnt. There was no place to give injection. So he was not given a single injection. The funny bit is that after that day, nobody could ever find out anything about Chanpisa. Harin Shah was the only person in this world to have met her and derived that irrefutable, fantastic evidence. And that's where it ended. Now, this is the quality of evidence that have been continuously put up in support of the plane crash and Netaji's death there. Let's come back to the other more serious bits of information which have been put up as evidence. Dr. Yoshimi claimed that because blood becomes thick due to burning, he took out about 200 cc of blood from Netaji's body and transfused about 400 cc of blood. This blood, according to Dr. Yoshimi, was obtained from a Japanese soldier. The other account that comes from Harin Shah, the investigative genius, is that this blood was obtained from a Japanese medical student. Minor discrepancy. There is some more of this minor discrepancy. Dr. Suruta was there with Dr. Yoshimi, but he said that no blood transfusion was given. Habib couldn't even remember whether any blood transfusion was being given or not. Quite odd, no? His supreme commander was being treated. He was constantly on the vigil. And a vital piece of treatment he has no recollection of. There was another doctor in the hospital who gave his version to the Shanwas committee, Dr. Ishii. He said he was going around here and there and he noticed that there was this person lying around on the bed and the nurse was trying to give some blood transfusion. So he went and helped the nurse and he took charge of the blood transfusion. And at that time, neither Suruta nor Yoshimi was there. Well and good. So one more version. Now while all this treatment was going on, some military officers and along with them Juichi Nakamura, an interpreter who had previously known Netaji and Habibur Rahman, arrived. Now Nakamura is a very critical character here. We have to pay good attention to his activities, his versions. He worked with the Japanese Foreign Office and, according to Habib, was an intelligence officer. According to Nakamura, Netaji told him that a few more of his men were following him and would soon arrive, and asked him to take care of them. After that, Netaji inquired about General Shidei, but Nakamura had no idea or information about Shidei. He didn't even know him. According to Habib, Netaji asked for Habib Hassan, but he informed Netaji that Hassan was not there. Thereafter, Netaji was completely unconscious. To the Shanwas Khan committee, Habib had mentioned that while they lay on the ground in the airport waiting for the medical help to arrive, Netaji gave him the last message that he had fought all his life for his country and he had no doubt that India would be free soon. But when he recounted this incident to Ayar, the location shifted to the hospital. It's like there is a dialogue that has to be delivered, but you forget where it has to be delivered. So to one person you deliver it at one point of sequence, and to another person you repeat the performance but in a different sequence. This is quite funny. I mean, it's Habibur Rahman, his supreme commander, lying beside him, dying in front of him, and he can't recall. His memory fades, his memory fails. That he said so many lines, but where and when, he can't recall. Do you think that is even likely? I mean, the last words of famous men are often more famous because they are the last words. And here we have Habibur Rahman, the closest aide of Netaji, standing by his side or lying by his side, and can't recall when Netaji said something. He said it, but when? He can't recall. Minor discrepancy. Again, the end was near, and very soon Netaji breathed his last. According to Habib, it was around 9 p.m. Nakamura's account is close enough, between 9 and 9:30. Understandable. These are minor variations and can be completely understood. Dr. Yoshimi said shortly after 8 p.m. As a doctor, he should have remembered the time of death because he was required to write a death certificate. But the same Dr. Yoshimi, when he was interrogated by the War Crimes Liaison Officer in 1946, gave out the time as 11 p.m. That was in October 1946, closer to the death of Netaji. 11 p.m. That 11 p.m. came down to around 8 p.m. by 1956. Minor discrepancy. The problem arose with Suruta. When Suruta was interrogated by Colonel Feggs, he protested vehemently. He said it cannot be 11 p.m. It was just after 7 p.m. And he remembered categorically that it was still daylight outside. Strange, no? These minor discrepancies. When Suruta remembers that it was daylight outside and the time was just after 7 p.m. When Yoshimi comes down from 11 p.m. to 8 p.m. and Habib and Nakamura say around 9:30 p.m. How does a man die peacefully? But Chanpisa had more drama to add. It was a very Bollywood, Hindi filmy style ending of Netaji, and Harin Shah lapped it up. Chanpisa said that when the end came, Netaji groaned a little bit. Then 2 or 3 words tumbled out of his mouth. These words were, "Quiet death. I am dying peacefully." I'm sorry, I don't know what to say. I have no remarks on this. Neither on Harin Shah nor on Chanpisa. But I should not forget to mention that the Shahnawaz Khan committee acknowledged the value of Harin Shah's investigation in their report. Shahnawaz Khan thanked Harin Shah for his brilliant, valuable investigation. Now you have some idea what kind of eyewitness, what kind of evidence that we have been talking all about. Now the plot thickens and more twists enter the story. First, let's quickly recapitulate what Habib said to the Shahnawaz Khan committee about the immediate aftermath of Netaji's death. That night, Habib requested Juichi Nakamura to go back to the army headquarters in Taihoku and tell them to make arrangements for taking Netaji's body back to Singapore. The key members of the provisional government of Azad Hind and the INA were all there in Singapore. Before we go on, there is one point that we must take note of because it stands out as incredible. The supreme commander, their leader, their Netaji, is dead, and we see no effort on the part of Habibur Rahman to contact his comrades either in Saigon or in Singapore. He just passes on a message to Nakamura to be conveyed to the headquarters. Wouldn't it be natural for him to get in touch with his closest comrades? Wouldn't it be natural for him to report the entire incident to the person who is in charge of the Azad Hind movement at that time, MZ Kiani? Habib was not leading the movement. It was MZ Kiani who was put in charge by Netaji. So it is but natural that he should try to get in touch with MZ Kiani and report the entire incident to him. But we see nothing of that sort from Habib. To come back to the flow of events. When the next morning, that is on the 19th, Nakamura arrived with some Japanese army officers, Habib again placed his request to them to make arrangements so that the body can be flown to Singapore. The Japanese officer reassured Habib that it will be done. Shortly thereafter, Netaji's body was put inside a coffin which arrived from the headquarters. The lid of the coffin was nailed. It was closed. This happened, according to Habib, in the afternoon. Now, Habib claimed that he sent back Nakamura in the evening to the army headquarters again to place the same request about making arrangements for Netaji's body to be taken to Singapore. And after some time, Nakamura returned to Habib and informed that the body cannot be taken because a coffin cannot be put inside a bomber. Now, Nakamura said something very, very different. He said that he didn't come to the hospital in the morning of the 19th August at all. He came in the afternoon around 1 or 2 p.m. By that time, Netaji's body had already been put inside the coffin. And he never gave any hint that Habib ever asked him to convey a message to the headquarters or that he sent him to the headquarters to talk to them about transporting Netaji's body to Singapore. Instead, Nakamura said that when he arrived at the hospital, Habib told him that the decision was already made to cremate Netaji's body. We are talking about the 19th of August. According to Habib, this decision was taken only on the morning of the 20th of August. We get a completely different picture from Dr. Suruta. Dr. Suruta told Colonel Figgs that the coffin arrived in the midnight, a few hours after Netaji's death, and by the morning of 19th August, it had been taken away. To the Shahnawaz Khan committee, Suruta said the body remained on the bed the whole night of the 18th, 19th, and that the coffin was brought in on the 19th, and after putting the body in the 19th, in the coffin, it remained there for the next 2-3 days. Suruta had also been interrogated by the Japanese government in 1955. During that interrogation, he claimed that he was not there when the body was put inside the coffin. He claimed that several days later, when he was walking through the corridor of the hospital, he found the coffin in a special room. So Suruta to Figgs, Suruta to the Japanese government, and Suruta to the Shahnawaz Khan committee. Reading his statements raised the question whether it is the same person. Well, of course, the person is the same, it is Dr. T. Suruta. But then, such wide divergence, can we call this just failing of memory? Can we call these minor discrepancies? Dr. Yoshimi added further twist. When interrogated in the Stanley jail in Hong Kong by the War Crimes Liaison Officer, Dr. Yoshimi told him that after Bose's body was put inside the coffin, It was taken to the airport for transporting it to Japan, but then for some unknown reason, it was brought back to the hospital. This is not something that Dr. Yoshimi heard from somebody else, but he had a conversation with Warrant Officer Nishi, who was in charge of this movement of the coffin. Warrant Officer Nishi informed Dr. Yoshimi that the coffin was taken to the Taihoku airport and brought back because it, for some unknown reason. But there is much more. So hang on. Don't be impatient.